at night. Just sitting there.
That's beautiful.
With your shoes on.
Yeah, no, shoes on. Shoes on, a soda, looking at the stars. Grant, it's changed my life.
Sheepers,
Very good,
super
yes.
wife.
Grant?
Well, I think, it's really about having a sense of purpose in life. We all need to tune out sometime, and that can be really healthy for our brains, but only, as you say, up to a point, as research shows, because the mind can, start telling stories that can be unhelpful. And one of the great things I think about mindfulness, sort of think of mindfulness as having two aspects. And the first aspect really is turning up for life mentally as well as physically, which is kind of a weird way of speaking because physically we don't have a choice, although the body's always in the moment, but we can be mentally absent. And that can, that can really sort of trigger the fight-flight response in the brain where we're not mentally present, which increases stress. And, is obviously unhealthy for us.
Rawani?
So when we...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah?
Yeah, let's bring Rawani in. What's your thoughts on this, Rawani?
I'm very good. I'm very good at mindless.
Yeah?
I Wordle, obviously beautiful. But is that I'm using my mind, but it is pretty mindless. And I took to, I'm going to come out now. I was obsessed, and I still am, doing the countdown supermarket, the figurines.
Oh, the Lego.
And I can leave the Lego, so I can do it in front of the TV. It's my switching off.
Grant?
Well, it's like...
Is that a good one?
Engaged focus. It's, you're engaging your mind in something, which is, that is beneficial, that is healthy. Again, I think up to a point, like if you're doing, one Wordle or if you're doing 50 Wordles, there's going to be a difference there.
Yeah.
If you're doing them all in a row, there's going to be maybe a negative impact on that. But I think really the key thing is to know what your mind's up to in any given moment, and to have sort of strategies and tools to be able to interrupt the mind when it's up to no good, so to speak, and no good might be just worrying about things that really don't need to be worried about.
Quick word, Pax.
Because that's when the fight-flight response kicks in and the stress increases.
It also makes me think, when you think about wanting to take time off, my go-to is mindless, but that's because the majority of my time when I'm working is all mind. As a comedian, the majority of my work is the use of the mind and almost no use of the body. So when I want to take time off, I really just want that time to just veg out and let my brain rest almost. Totally. So it's almost like, would you say it could be dependent on what you spend a lot of your time doing, really?
Absolutely. It's always contextual, So like you say, if you're just in that space of thinking about things all the time, and you're engaging your mind in certain ways, you absolutely need that time.
Wonderful, Grant. We're going to leave it there, but kia ora, what a wonderful way to end the panel. Pax, Rawani, fantastic. Shoes on, Pax. Shoes on, Rawani. Get out there in the real world. Have a great weekend. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you Monday.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, police put the brakes on enforcement against Parliament's protesters as crowds swell to more than 800 ahead of the weekend. And they're putting down roots, installing a herb garden and building a stage. The brakes also go on the Napier-Taupo highway where the speed limit drops to 80 k's. Almost 2,000 cases of COVID-19 today, and there's a cash injection for isolation support as more people are stuck at home. Some of those camped out at the capital reckon they won't go until vaccination mandates do. So is no jab, no job still justified? And Omicron causes more than a runny nose and headache for sporting venues and events. And this is not your regular bogey on the green. A Dunedin sea lion and her pup hit the golf course.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Police won't stop people joining the anti-mandate protest at Parliament over the weekend, with numbers expected to swell. Commissioner Andrew Costa says about 800 people are at the protest today, and while it's unknown how many will join, the crowd will definitely increase. He says police will put a traffic management plan in place.
That was the pattern last weekend. Many of those people are visiting because of the nature of the event, and left again after the day. I'm sure we will see that. Our goal with the traffic management plan is to redirect traffic to Sky Stadium so that we don't add to the congestion that already exists.
Andrew Costa this afternoon ruled out any enforcement action to do with the protest. He says most people are behaving reasonably, but the situation was likely to escalate if enforcement action, such as towing, began. Almost 30 community and business leaders have told protesters at Parliament that the harassment and disruption to Wellingtonians needs to end. Among those who've signed the joint statement are the region's mayors, MPs, principals and business leaders. They say the people of Wellington have had enough of illegal activity and it needs to end immediately. Wellington Central MP Grant Robertson says the statement was written on behalf of Wellingtonians.
There's obviously a high degree of frustration for Wellingtonians, a lot of disruption, harassment of people going about their lawful business, and a real desire for community leadership to present a united front.
Grant Robertson says Wellingtonians want to be able to get on with their lives. Wellington Mayor Andy Foster and business leaders are asking for urgent government support for businesses affected by the anti-mandate protests on top of 2 years of pandemic-related hardship. Mr Foster says foot traffic and spending in the central city is down 20 to 30%, and some hospitality businesses estimate they'll have to close within the month. He says the council is considering rate deferrals and parking incentives, along with free outdoor dining permits and promotional activity. But he says what's needed is government support in the form of payments for businesses. Police say there have been no arrests made in Christchurch, where 3 separate groups gathered to protest vaccines and mandates. The protests, which appear to be unrelated, saw small groups congregate at the University of Canterbury and outside civic buildings and the offices of some media organisations. Staff reports protesters carrying anti-media signs had to ask a journalist for directions to their office. Police say officers monitored the protests, but there were no issues and no one was arrested. The Minister for Social Development and Employment, Kamel Sepuloni, says the boost in funding for those in self-isolation will help vulnerable whānau amidst the Omicron outbreak. Today, the government has announced over $140 million will go into funding food banks and around 200 more workers known as community connectors. Kamel Sepuloni says food is the most requested hardship grant provided by Ministry of Social Development, making up 67% of all grants.
There are some whānau who maybe would have used other family members as the ones that would provide them with the support to get food or give them access to food. But for some, their whole network has been isolating, and so they have found it difficult with regards to access.
There are 1,929 new community cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand today, a record high. Another 9 people have been arrested in an ongoing drugs investigation in Wairoa in northern Hawke's Bay. Detective Inspector David DeLonghi says 5 of the group are mongrel mob members, including senior members of the Mongrellism and Barbarian chapters. They face several charges involving meth and money laundering. More than 1 kilogram of the drug has been seized. To sport, and the Black Caps lead by 325 runs on the second day of the first cricket test against South Africa in Christchurch. The New Zealanders are 420 for 9, thanks in part to Henry Nicholls hitting 105. Tom Blundell is on 70, and yesterday's bowling hero Matt Henry is on 22. And the White Ferns need 120 runs from 20 overs as they chase down India's 279 in Queenstown. Amelia Kerr is on 67, with the New Zealand women in 151 for 3. The football ferns have suffered a horror start to lose in California. Iceland scored in just the first minute after the New Zealanders conceded an early corner and held on for the win. New Zealand also play the United States and the Czech Republic in the Four Nations competition. Meanwhile, the Phoenix women will kick off their W League game against Adelaide in an hour's time. And Hurricanes captain Adi Savea believes there'll be a few All Blacks worried about how they'll go on the opening weekend of Super Rugby Pacific. Savea's side takes on the Crusaders in Dunedin tomorrow night, while the Chiefs play the Highlanders in Queenstown in the afternoon. 23 All Blacks will be playing their first games of the season in this weekend's 2 games, and Savea isn't sure how long he'll last.
I think it's not a minutes thing. I think it's see how my lungs go. I'm actually really nervous, and I think a lot of the AB's boys are nervous as, we haven't played a rugby game in a couple months, so I'm trying to do our best to prep and mentally be there, but we'll just have to wait and see how it goes.
And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, historian Rutger Bregman has a radical idea. Most people, he says, deep down, are pretty decent. Rose Matafeo on her hit TV rom-com Starstruck. I talked with her the other day. She humiliates me for my ignorance. And Wendy Mitchell, who was diagnosed with dementia 8 years ago and has learned to see it as a gift. Call Kim Hillaho, join me tomorrow morning from 8 here on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next, but first, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, fine spells and the odd shower at times. Waikato to Taumarunui, the central high country, also Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine with isolated afternoon showers. Taranaki to Wellington, generally fine. The odd shower about Taranaki and Wellington tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, but showers developing in Bulla this evening. Rain spreading from the south tomorrow afternoon and evening, heavy at times with possible thunderstorms about Bulla, Western Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds. Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud today. Rain tomorrow, clearing during the afternoon or evening. Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with showers. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight and spreading north tomorrow morning. Heavy and possibly thundery at times, then clearing from the south. And for the Chatham Islands, long fine spells. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll be back with the headlines at 5:30.
Kia ora rā, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Protesters have escaped any imminent police crackdown as they flout the law outside Parliament, blocking roads and setting up more and more tents. Community leaders have added their cries to the politicians, asking for an end to the illegal activity. They say they want their city back, but the protesters are not going anywhere and the police won't force them. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
We are at war.
So much for de-escalation. This, the response to the politicians pleading. MPs have asked the protesters to pack up their tents, to move their cars and quit the intimidation. Then they say, maybe we'll talk. The protesters say, yeah, nah.
A protest is made to make a disturbance so that we get our point across.
As the weekend nears, numbers have swelled, now roughly 800 on site, and they are putting down roots. A veggie garden was set up today, joining the food trucks in Portaloos. A new stage erected down from Parliament steps.
More people are coming. More people are coming every single day.
Chantal Baker is a key voice on Parliament's grounds, live streaming to her 80,000 Facebook followers every day.
I mean, I'm not quite sure how much longer they can ignore everyone for.
Her father is Leighton Baker, the former leader of the New Conservatives. He describes himself as an intermediary.
The politicians had the opportunity to solve this about 8 days ago. They never did anything, and the longer they leave it, the bigger it gets. The responsibility is on their shoulders to talk to the people. You can't talk to the people. It's the balls in their court.
None of the disparate groups linked to the protest have yet to formally respond to the politician's statement. The lack of clear leadership or unified purpose making it difficult to make progress. Some say they just want a fair hearing and will pack up and go as soon as the vaccine mandates are scrapped.
They can drop the mandates, we'll all go home.
We just need them inside to come and talk to us and come to some sort of agreement.
Even if it takes all night, I will still try to stand my ground with my
He's here for the long run. I think we all are.
If we're here 6 months from now, so be it. We're here till the mandates go.
But there's a hostile side to the protest too. Signs calling for the death of politicians, calls for Parliament to be pulled down. One man confronted a camera person and said he should be 6 feet under.
There's some angry people, so of course you're going to say I'd like to hang them from the nearest lamppost. But that's the feeling out there.
Just be thankful to Wellington that we ain't going down Lambton Quay.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. Why don't you take that effing mask off, mate?
Local businesses are at their wits' end. Most didn't want to be identified for fear of repercussions, but complain of abuse and say customers are staying away.
Sometimes the protesters, they will come in without masks, but we can't serve them. And then they were like swearing to us as well. It's hard because you're here for work and not for abuse.
No one coming into town because they don't feel safe.
There was a lady became quite abusive to one of their staff, and they had to close early because that staff member actually became quite distressed about it.
Local community leaders have heard the cries and issued a statement of their own, another letter saying enough is enough. Local MPs added their names, including Wellington Central's Grant Robertson.
The protesters tell us that they want to be peaceful. Well, here's their chance to do the right thing. Decisions about what happens when people break the law are in the hands of the police.
But if politicians and business owners were hopeful the police might bring about a quick resolution, they're out of luck. Talk of towing vehicles has been put on ice. The Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says any enforcement action would risk sparking violence.
We believe the only way to resolve this situation safely is to de-escalate and to continue in the dialogue that we've opened with protest groups.
The police are in touch with some key protest leaders. They say they've had constructive engagement and will focus on keeping the peace. But the weekend is coming, and so too are more people to join the cause.
We recognise that this is a frustrating situation for the people of Wellington. We recognise that it's causing massive disruption, but equally, for safety reasons, we don't consider that now's an appropriate time to be sending police out.
That means no matter the letters, no matter the political promises, this protest is here to stay.
And the Police Association President Chris Cahill joins me now. Kia ora, Chris, what's your assessment of the strategy that police are adopting here?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, I've received a fairly comprehensive briefing today, and I'd have to say I agree with where police have gone. It's very frustrating. I certainly know from Wellingtonian point of view they'll be frustrated, but we have to look at it from two things. One is the police can only use a reasonable amount of force in the circumstances. And the reality is most of the protesters are not committing physical violence, so the limited amount of force police could use won't resolve it. And then the second is how much force would New Zealanders actually tolerate? And what would be acceptable in some countries certainly wouldn't be here. And so police weigh all that up. They don't think they can resolve it by using any physical force to remove them, and I have to agree.
So the short version of that is they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't?
Yeah, exactly right. And look, the other thing to factor in, as soon as police take proactive action, all that leads to is increase in protesters. I mean, last week they arrested 120 people. It led to a doubling of the protesters. So, it's unfortunate, it's inconvenient, but it's the reality that police are facing.
But Chris, the floodgates are going to open over the weekend. They're planting gardens there. That's not something that you do because you're going to be there for a day or two. Something that you do, you're going to be harvesting in about a month or so. So what's stopping everybody, that crowd, swelling over the weekend?
Well, look, I think it probably will swell over the weekend, but I might be being optimistic. But I also think when a number of them realise there is not going to be a confrontation, the actual incentive to be there will drop away for quite a few, and those numbers will dwindle. But I've always said this is in here for the long term. But what you have to factor in is people sitting on a lawn is not a major problem compared with battling riots in the street. And that would be the outcome, I believe, if police tried to remove them. Then I looked at
Sorry, Chris, is there only those two things on the spectrum, sitting on the lawn or a riot? Because the other thing is some of those people aren't just sitting on the lawn, right? There are people who've had threats and threats of violence. There's school kids who've been hassled and harassed. There are businesses that are closed because they can't come and go freely. There's a young couple with a baby who are having to move out of their apartment because the noise is so great that the child can't sleep. So, there are consequences for other people too. So where do their rights fit into this?
Yeah, there are consequences, and it is incredibly disappointing that the protesters aren't willing to look at that side of things. But I think the reality is, and we saw it when we tried to arrest 120 people, or we did, that it just escalates dramatically. And, I look back, 40 years ago, police went about doing what a lot of New Zealanders want and dealt with the Springbok riot. That, in the end, did not get the support of the majority of New Zealanders, and police still suffer that 40 years later. I think the last thing we want to end up with is a situation where police are battling in riot conditions with a large number of protesters.
Does the Commissioner...
The consequence of what's actually happening now. Most of them are actually just passively resisting. Incredibly annoying, but they're not committing violence.
So does the Commissioner have the confidence of frontline officers?
Oh, look, I think the officers are there. Many of them, much like me at times, would like to go in and clear it out. But I think we're all realistic now, and that would not actually achieve what they want. And look,
but that doesn't answer my question, Chris. Chris, the question was specifically, does the Commissioner have the confidence of frontline officers?
Well, I believe in this situation they're sensible enough to know that he's made the right call. The officers, one, don't want to be put at risk, and also, two, they don't want to be put at risk of acting illegally. And I believe the courts would struggle to say officers using the proportion of force that would be required to move these people would actually be legally proportionate given the risk they pose. And that's the simple case that they're dealing with.
What do you say to those people who think it's hagathag or cuddles Costa?
Yeah, look, it's not. And I came from, we need to be more proactive to actually looking at the reality. I mean, let's take moving the vehicles. The bottom line is, as soon as police talked about moving the vehicles, the protesters went and sat in them. You can't remove the vehicles with people in them for two reasons. One is a health and safety, but two is you're technically illegally then detaining someone. Are you going to smash the windows and drag all these people out? Bearing in mind some of them are children and you'll be terrifying them. So those are the reality of the situation the police have to act under. It's not a simple case of moving in and using what force is required. It's just going to have to be patient, unfortunately.
Chris,
it's a worldwide problem.
Yeah, can you tell us, hand on heart, that policing and crime resolution elsewhere is not suffering as a result of having all these resources down at this protest?
No, I'd say the opposite. It is suffering. Without a doubt, less urgent matters will not be able to be prioritised and be put on hold. There's without a doubt victims of crime, normally minor crime, will not be getting the service around the country, and that's that's the other in consideration these protests are making. No one's saying they're doing the right thing. No one's saying they're being considerate. They're incredibly selfish, I would say.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Chris Cahill, who is the President of the Police Association. Homai o whakaro. We'd love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you think of the strategy that the police are adopting? They say de-escalation is the only safe way forward and that there's a risk of, violence if they move against the protesters. They say they're speaking to key people within that protest movement and that's how they're going to handle it. Let us know your thoughts. Pātui mai. Text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It is 19 minutes past 5. Kia ora rā watu mō te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei. Coming up, a top doctor warns the government to stop scaremongering over Omicron. Omicron is continuing its silent creep through the community with almost 2,000 cases reported today. There are 73 people in hospital with the virus and 1 in ICU. The high demand for tests has health authorities warning about delays in getting results back. The government's pumping more money into support the thousands of people forced into isolation. Our reporter Alice Stewart and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
Omicron is now rapidly circling in the community, case numbers doubling every few days. In the peak of the Delta outbreak last year, the highest number of daily cases reached was 222 in November. But increasingly, COVID is creeping into our homes and workplaces. Today, the Ministry of Health reported 1,929 new cases, another new record, with just over 1,000 of those in Tāmaki Makaurau. On the streets of Mangere town centre, some are anxious and concerned about the possibility of catching it and having to self-isolate.
Pretty stressed, actually.
Yeah, well, when you got the usage of technology, you got Uber and all that, so you get all these guys to deliver it out your doorway, so you don't fall too much. But the essentials, yes, that can be an issue. So you do sort of rely on your phone and everything, but you try to make sure that you keep that social distance and everything so they don't get it.
Well, we've got plenty of food. We've got family if we needed help close by. It would be very easy to self-isolate.
Not looking forward to having to self-isolate if we have to, but you've got to do what you've got to do. They do need to be supported, especially bigger families who need to, in close contact with each other in small houses. They need support and they need all the help they can get. Yeah, I totally appreciate that.
While catching Omicron may not be a big deal for fully vaccinated, boosted Kiwis, trying to organise self-isolation can be a major ordeal for larger families. One woman we spoke to said she didn't get the help she needed to self-isolate last year.
I only have one child who is not part of our home bubble, and he was the one that was kind of running around to do things for us, but then he also has his own work. But when it comes to basically just doing food shopping, it was hard.
Today, the government announced a $140 million funding boost to supporting people isolating. That will go towards 197 more workers known as community connectors. Social Development and Employment Minister Carmel Sepuloni says they will help vulnerable whānau access what they need.
They may need support with regards to mental health. They may need support with regards to drug and addiction services. They may need support with respect to family violence situations if they're self-isolating and things are not healthy in the home. There are a range of things. So the Community Connector is able to get them connected to the support that they will need.
It is also putting $86 million into food banks. Minister Sepuloni says food continues to be what most people need.
There are some whānau who maybe would have used other family members as the ones that would provide them with the support to get food or give them access to food. But for some, their whole network has been isolating, and so they have found it difficult with regards to access.
Minister Sepuloni says she is confident they are well prepared to be able to meet the rising demand. Kaitiaki Mātua at Te Puia Memorial Marae in Mangere, Huri Moana Dennis, says a lot of whānau panic when they find out they have COVID.
The maraes are here to help, the providers are here to help. That's the main thing. Otherwise, people, particularly families, who were just going about their business and then all of a sudden they've got to go home and self-isolate. Well, what's in the cupboard? So these are the sorts of things that I think that this program has been very helpful with.
He says they will be welcoming everyone who needs support.
The main thing is to get them through their self-isolation out the door so they can get back on into work in there. But you can always do with more resources, Bo, but right now we're okay, we're coping okay.
Testing centres are under increased pressure. Health officials say some results are coming back within 48 hours, but others, particularly in Auckland, are taking longer.
And the video for that story, filmed by Marika Habazi, will be on our website. Do check it out. It's time for a change in mindset when it comes to COVID. That's the view of Dr. Brian Betty, who's the Medical Director of the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners, and he joins me now. Hi, Brian. What's the problem at the moment, do you think?
Oh, look, I think the situation has changed very rapidly. For the last 2 years, we've dealt with COVID in the sense of Delta, which is a very dangerous disease. We've had an elimination strategy, keep it out of New Zealand. We can't have it in. And I think it's built up quite a fear or anxiety in the community about COVID. However, in the last 4 to 5 weeks, the situation has changed dramatically with Omicron, which is not Delta. It's much more like a common cold, flu-like illness, and I think we need to move into a space very rapidly of thinking we're going to live with this and get back to some sort of normality.
So who's doing the scaring or instilling the fear in people?
I think over the last 2 years that anxiety, which we see on a daily basis in general practice, has been quite high because of where we've been, and that's perfectly natural in terms of where we've got to with Delta, and I was very supportive of the approach we took. However, now, some of the discourse that we see in the media about healthcare emergencies and things like that, the language I don't think is particularly helpful. We need to be de-escalating this down to get into a position where most of us are just going to have a mild to moderate illness that we're going to get through like any respiratory illness in winter, and we need to be moving on. And perhaps the way we're approaching it at the moment is causing more problems than good, and we may have reached a pivot point with that.
So, just to be clear, Brian, do you think the government is ratcheting up fear and unnecessary anxiety?
Look, the government's taken a particular approach up until this point. I think there needs to be an open debate about how we move very rapidly into de-escalating our approach to COVID at this point, move out of it and start to move back into some sort of normality. My real concern is there's other things happening in the system at the moment, which COVID is freezing out. We've got influenza coming, which kills about 500 people a year. I'm really worried about the influenza vaccine program. Our childhood immunisation rates have fallen to 76%, and so I'm really worried about measles or whooping cough showing itself up again. And these are actually dangerous conditions that I believe could have the potential to start to be with us again because COVID is dominating our discourse at this point.
What do you think about the numbers of people who are turning up for COVID tests at the moment?
Look, I think we do have a problem there. There's limited capacity in the laboratories. That is very, very obvious. Again, I think this is symptomatic of the anxiety people quite justifiably have about the situation at this point. But the bulk of those turning up, or a lot of those turning up, are asymptomatic. And really, that we don't have the capacity to test those at the moment. But it is a reflection of the anxiety that's in the community at the moment. And I think we need to start to move away from this.
So how is that anxiety translating into everyday life? What are you seeing and hearing?
Well, certainly in practice, if I talk about practice, people are really concerned about COVID and what's actually happening. We're fielding a lot of calls across the country in general practice in terms of people anxious about COVID, what to do, what they need to do if it strikes and happens. And I'm getting a lot of concern back from general practitioners themselves about the huge burden and pressure this is placing on practices. And actually what's starting to happen is the business as usual, those preventative immunisation programs, preventative cancer screening, looking after chronic disease, are really starting to get compromised. So there's real concerns about the ability to maintain service at this point.
So what do you want to hear from the Prime Minister then?
Look, I think obviously the decisions that are made are political decisions for the Prime Minister and Minister Hipkins.
But in terms of messaging, Brian, which is what you're talking about, you're talking about a climate of unnecessary anxiety and fear. So what message do you want the Prime Minister putting out there then?
Look, I think we need to start to say that for most people, this will just be a mild disease, that we can cope with this, we can live with it, it is okay. Yes, some people will end up in hospital, we know that's the case, but this is just part of a normal viral illness that we've now got living with us at this point, and we need to take a step back. As part of that process, I would expect very rapidly that the isolation guidelines we've got in place at the moment would start to be cut back quite rapidly.
To what?
Well, I mean, look, we've seen this overseas. We've seen it in the UK and Scandinavia and Australia, where a lot of the isolation restrictions have been cut back. We've already gone from 14 days back to 10. I'd expect those to go back to 7 and be reduced again because we need to start living with COVID.
Reduced again to what? From 7 down to what? Some do 3 days. So is that what you'd like to see here?
Well, at some point, that's probably the space we'll end up in. Now, the timings with that are purely up to the government, the Prime Minister, but we need to expect that's what will happen over time.
And do you think that would help ease anxiety, Brian?
I think it does start to lessen anxiety in terms of the way we're thinking about this. It certainly takes some of the pressure off the workforce issues we're starting to see at the moment, and it would certainly start to reduce things back a bit.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Dr. Brian Betty, who's the Medical Director of the Royal New Zealand College of GPs. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about the protest. Ian says, unbelievable. Now we have the Police Commissioner facilitating anarchy with the support of the government. At a time when we need leadership, government and the police have failed us. We should not be pushed around by a minority. Sue's also got in touch. Life is hard for so many of us, yet we have pulled together to get this far. I am so saddened and enraged that a minority of different people, some badly misguided, can threaten to derail all that has been achieved. They are breaking the law and common decency, and so why can't something be done to dissipate them? Why allow them to wreck what the majority are trying to make the best of and help each other? And a Thorndon resident's got in touch to say the protesters, okay by me, no disruption experience. So-called community leaders are useless. And one more, I think, before we carry on. Andrew Costa needs to go. He's a snowflake, says that listener. E te iwi e haere nei e a checkpoint. Some of the Parliament protesters reckon they won't budge until vaccination mandates are scrapped. So is no jab, no job still justified? We speak to two experts, one medical, one legal. And lying around on a Dunedin golf course, a sea lion in her pup, that is. Ho mai o whakaaro. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight. Text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita kōrero.
Tēnā koe Lisa, kia ora tātou, ko Iwi Ashton tēnei. Police won't stop people joining the protest at Parliament over the weekend, with numbers expected to swell. Commissioner Andrew Costa says about 800 people are at the protest today. This afternoon he ruled out any enforcement action. He says a threat earlier in the week to tow vehicles blocking the roads is an option police are no longer pursuing. They'll try to divert cars arriving this weekend to nearby Sky Stadium instead of allowing them to further block the roads. The Police Association President Chris Cahill told Checkpoint frontline officers support the Commissioner's stance. He says when the police have acted, such as carrying out arrests and threatening to tow vehicles, the number of protesters has increased. Almost 13 business and community leaders have told the protesters that the harassment and disruption to Wellingtonians needs to end. Among those who've signed a joint statement are the region's mayors, MPs, principals and business leaders. They say the people of Wellington have had enough of illegal activity and it needs to end immediately. The head of the judiciary is worried about the disruption the Parliament protest is having on the courts. The Chief Justice, Dame Helen Winkelman, says protesters' vehicles are blocking the secure access area to the court and tents have been erected in the court precinct. There are more than 1,900 new cases of COVID-19 in the community today. 73 people with the virus are in hospital, with one in intensive care. A New Zealand billionaire businessman has donated 30 fishing boats and 8 tractors to the Tonga relief effort. Graham Hart has also donated enough food to feed school children in Tonga one healthy breakfast each day. And the Black Caps have stretched their lead over South Africa to 365 runs on the second day of the first test in Christchurch. A short time ago, the New Zealanders were 460 for 9, thanks in part to Henry Nicholls hitting 105. Tom Blundell is on 89 and yesterday's bowling hero, Matt Henry, is on 43. Those are the headlines. We'll have a full bulletin for you at 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Time for business now, ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona, latest data indicates that mortgaged homeowners are well positioned to weather rising interest rates. Who says and why?
Well, it's Westpac New Zealand's data. It's talking about their customers. They're saying more than 2/3 of their home loan customers are way ahead on monthly mortgage repayments. At the end of 2021, the total number of months ahead in repayments was in fact 10.5 months. And that's created quite a buffer for all the customers. But look, in some parts of the country, for example, Wellington, the customers there, 75% were ahead of of their repayments, and by the equivalent of something like 19 months on average. So quite a lot of customers are ahead on their repayments. That's providing a bit of a buffer. And what it also reflects is that people are choosing to spend more of their discretionary spending on getting down their debt levels rather than luxury items like, meals out and, accommodation and travel overseas.
And Nona, the Commerce Commission has joined in action to crack down on possible cartel behaviour in global supply chains. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it sort of seems like a bit of a coming together of the Five Eyes. So we're talking about Australia, Canada, UK and the US. The Commerce Commission is going to work with relevant authorities in those jurisdictions. They're going to share intelligence and other kinds of ways of detecting potential cartel conduct that's taking place as a result of the disruption to the supply chain caused by the pandemic. Now, how it's going to work out is they're going to just share information and then look at how they can work together to sort of stamp out any bad behavior, anti-competitive behavior on the part of, manufacturers, freight forwarders, you name it, the people that are operating along the supply chain, because certainly we have seen some pretty hefty rises along that route.
And should we take a Friday twirl around the markets, please, Nona?
We should, yes. So the markets are a little bit gloomy today. And that's also because of the concern over the ongoing tensions between the Ukraine and Russia. So we ended down nearly 1%, 115 points down to 12,142. New Zealand dollar is steady, though, at 67.1 US cents, 93.1 Australian, and 49.3 pence.
Nā mihi Nona, ka kite. It's Nona Peltier with Business News. The speed limit on a notorious stretch of highway has dropped to 80 k's an hour today. Motorists will now have to drive slower on about 70 k's between Napier and Taupo in a bid to make the road safer after several fatal accidents. It's a move the Transport Agency says is crucial, but it hasn't been popular with regional leaders and many locals. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen went for a drive.
Kia ora. I'm here in Napier this morning and I'm about to drive to Taupo. Why is that? Well, it's because the speed's reduced to 80k. There's been a lot of anger and frustration in the community about this. So for the first day of it being 80, I'm going to take a drive to see what it's actually like.
Most of the public didn't want this change, but the Transport Agency Waka Kotahi says it's necessary to keep people safe on this treacherous stretch of road. Along the road now, a huge 80-kilometre sign greets you, reading safer speed area. Every 2 and a bit k along the road, there's a smaller 80-kilometre sign reminding you not to forget. I'm here at the Tarawera Cafe, and this is the site of the last fatal crash on this road, which happened in October 2020. What happened was a van collided with a truck. A person in the van died, and the impact sent the truck flying all the way down this grassy verge here on the side of the road. I've talked to a few people that have driven along the road today, and it's fair to say their opinion on the speed limit change is pretty mixed.
I've been behind trucks and cars, so it hasn't felt particularly slower than usual, but the road is in really poor condition.
I think it's a good idea, honestly, because there's been too many accidents, and a lot of people say it's the roads, it's not, it's the drivers. That's what I think.
It would be nice to see a little bit of an improvement in the roads. I've actually had damaged tyres on this road before.
Taupo Mayor David Truavis certainly isn't a fan.
Just 80k, people are going to get so frustrated, I tell you, it's going to be a frightening thing.
I just made it here to Taupo, so what's my verdict on the road? Well, there were definitely parts where I wanted to creep up to 100k, but there are so many winding corners, you have to go 80 or less anyway.
In saying that, on my way back to Napier, I'm doing my best to stick closely to the speed limit, but there are still plenty of people passing me. I meet up with Sergeant Paul Omerod, who's been patrolling the road today.
Generally, people are sticking around the 80 to 90, 92k mark. The odd car has been creeping over 100, and we've stopped a few cars this morning. We haven't issued any tickets today, but we have helped educate people on the change in speed limit.
He's got this advice for those travelling on the road.
Utilise that cruise control more. That'll really help you keep that speed. You will creep up more going down hills when you're at 80 k's, and you just won't notice it because you're used to travelling at 100. So be a bit more focused and have an eye on that speed limit.
Still, regional leaders are unhappy. Hawke's Bay Regional Transport Committee Chair Martin Williams wrote a letter to Transport Minister Michael Wood earlier this week.
First and foremost, the principal request is an opportunity to meet with the Minister at mayoral level, involving the mayors of the territorial authorities, whose districts absolutely hinge in terms of well-being on the lifeline which that corridor provides.
He says they could very well still take Waka Kotahi to court.
We're getting, with urgency, legal advice on that, so that's definitely an option that we're pursuing, as we resolved to do as a Regional Transport Committee 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Waka Kotahi says it plans to evaluate how well the speed limit drop has gone in a year's time.
And if you're listening to that on radio, do check out the video. It'll be up on our web page. Some protesters at Parliament are adamant they won't budge until the government scraps all vaccine mandates. So how long can the government keep the no jab, no job orders in place? At the moment, the health order covers a vast number of workers, including police, teachers, defence, MIQ and health workers, to name some. And then there's the mandate of another kind, the requirement for a vaccination certificate to head to restaurants, cafes and big events like concerts. The initial no jab, no job order came into force in December when New Zealand was eyeing the threat of the highly virulent Delta strain and had low vaccination rates. But a lot has changed since then, and joining me now is Waikato University law professor Claire Breen. Kia ora, Claire.
Kia ora.
Claire, how long can the government enforce a vaccine mandate for? Can it be on the never, never?
When the vaccine mandates were initially passed, I guess the thinking around that from a legal perspective is the rights that are restricted have to be balanced with, I guess, the need to maintain and secure public health.
Claire, we're just, sorry for interrupting you, but we're having some real problems with your line. I'm wondering if you can just maybe, stand on the other foot or just adjust where you are ever so slightly, and we might get you a bit clearer, because we do want to hear what you've got to say. Many people will. So,
how does that sound?
Yeah, you're coming through now at the moment. I can hear you. So, can the government just leave it open-ended, this mandate, these mandates?
So when we're talking about mandates, on the one hand, we're talking about the need and the obligation to protect public health. On the other hand, we're talking about restrictions that are put on individual rights. The government can restrict our rights, but these restrictions have to be justifiable. So it's the justifiable question that we need to look at. Why are the restrictions imposed in the first place? Why are the mandates imposed in the first place? So if they're imposed as a means to try and protect the population against a particular threat.
Claire, we're really struggling with the line, so I think what we'll do is we'll try and give you a call back, and one of the producers will just pick up. So we'll come back to you because we really want to hear this conversation. In the meantime, the situation we have right now is that 95% of us are double jabbed and 62% have been boosted. Now, the mandates came into force in December when the focus was on the highly virulent Delta strain, and now it's Omicron amongst us, which is highly transmissible but less severe. So we're going to talk a bit later about the legal side when we can get Claire back on the line. But what about the health justification for the mandate? The Immunisation Advisory Centre medical advisor, Professor Peter McIntyre, joins us now. Peter, so with so many of us vaccinated, is there a medical or health justification to continue with compulsion, with mandates?
Well, kia ora, Lisa, I think it's obviously a very different situation to the situation we were facing at the end of last year. So Delta was nasty, Delta was infectious, and we had much lower vaccination coverage. And I think experience around the world has shown that mandates have had that nudge factor of getting up from the sort of 80 and 85% to the 95%, which is a fantastic place to be. And so New Zealand's confronting a situation now without Delta, whereas, that was really what hammered Sydney and other places, back in January. Without Delta, with Omicron, and with incredibly high coverage, particularly in the over 50s, which is where it's really, really important. And in those over 50s, even the boosters of all the people who are eligible, even bringing it down to 3 months, we're around the 90% mark, which it'd be nice to be 100, but it's a really fantastic situation to be in. So I think it is a different landscape. Omicron is a different beast, and even with 3 doses, we don't get as good a protection against infection and transmission with Omicron as with Delta, and it drops off. So I think the argument, for mandation was twofold. It was, let's protect the New Zealand health system against severe disease, intensive care admissions and so on at the individual level, and it was let's protect the community by reducing transmission and infection at the broad level. And I think that second one is just much less something we can do with Omicron, and we know we're in a fantastic position with the first one. So I think the game has shifted.
So are you suggesting, Peter, that there's some wiggle room in these mandates? Because you also mentioned, obviously, the strain on the health system. Close to 2,000 cases just today, and only 73 people in hospital, only one person in ICU. Yeah. So there is not a scenario where the health system is overrun. As you've just pointed out, high levels of vaccination rates. So could we adjust these mandates somehow? Because it's a two-tier mandate as well. You've got the vaccination certificate too.
That's right. Well, in fact, Lisa, I would say there's probably a three-tier mandate. So the hairy shirt level is employment and losing your job. The next level down is the irritation level of not being able to do stuff you want to do. And then the third level down, which I think, to be perfectly honest, probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, is a kind of mandate creep where we've been, trying to really encourage, secondary school students in that 12 to 17-year-old age group to step up and get their doses, which they have. But schools have overinterpreted that and are imposing all these unnecessary restrictions on kids in that age group, not being able to play sport, not being able to go and participate in school activities. And it's all because of their parents' decisions, which they're being punished for. And let's face it, even if they're unvaccinated, they're mixing with a whole group of other kids who are very low risk and are incredibly low risk now they've had their 2 doses. So I think particularly that third group, the kind of mandate that should never have been there in the first place, I think that's really an important one to tackle first. So if schools are telling kids they can't go on camp because they're not vaccinated, or they can't play in the volleyball team, or they can't be in the hip-hop group, do you think that needs to go? Unvaccinated children, in your view, should be able to participate in those events based on what you know about health and medical conditions? That's right. I think the health risk is now down to incredibly low levels. I recognise that there will be occasional children in schools who have severe immune problems and may not have been as well protected against the vaccine. And that's something which I guess schools have to be aware of and parents have to be aware of in that situation. But even recognising that, I think it's not justified in terms of the really low risk across the board to be punishing kids for the decisions of their parents. What about universities then? If you're talking about school kids, what about universities? Because some of them are looking at or bringing in vaccination mandates to be on campus. Should that be happening? Is there a justification in health terms for it? Well, again, I think that's been part of the whole push, the nudge push last year. And again, something that we were all worried about was that we'd never get the 20-year-olds over the line with high coverage, but that's happened. And so I think, again, probably the mandates may have served their purpose with incredibly high uptake amongst, that young adult university student group. But is it justified to say, well, you've got to have a booster as well, otherwise you can't come to lectures? On a health basis, I don't believe it is. So, from a health perspective, is it time then to review these no jab, no job mandates? Well, I'm sure the government's doing that because it's, the Prime Minister already said that she was reluctant to go down that path. She did it because she had to, and I think that was the right decision. And I'm sure government's aware that it's something that can't be in place forever. So I think it's a question of, obviously there's still a lot of caution and concern about where's Omicron going. People are nervous, they're not used to this. So I think we have to recognise that, and government has to, obviously take that into account. But I think something that could be done, very relatively quickly is just getting rid of those restrictions on the secondary school students, which I think, as I said, is a really unfair imposition on them. And then the nudge factor in terms of, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to an event. I think that's, how that operates could be reviewed, but and let's face it, if you haven't responded to it now, you're probably not going to.
So potentially, Peter, because I want to be clear on this, potentially you were saying that the vaccination certificate requirement to go to a concert or go to a cafe, that could be reviewed on health grounds. No longer necessary, potentially.
Yeah, potentially, I think, when we get a bit more vision of what's happening with the outbreak and a bit more confidence that is something that would merit revision. And let's face it, the other group, we've still got something like 60,000 adults who haven't had even their first dose. And as a percentage, it's very small and they're scattered around the country. But they're the people who, intensive care units could be seeing wheeled in, and they don't want to see them wheeled in. I don't want to see them wheeled in. So once we've got Novavax available, there's 3 vaccines to choose from, I think it'd be fantastic to get as many of that group over the line as we can as well.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. That is Professor Peter McIntyre from the Immunisation Advisory Centre. It is 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, how long can this go on? Protest numbers at Parliament are expected to swell over the weekend. A quiet park in Palmerston North is a world away from the full stadiums of India or even a packed basin reserve, but for former Black Caps men's cricket international Andrew Penn, it's the scene of a cricketing comeback at the age of 47. Jimmy Ellingham has more.
Finding the gap nicely. Keeping the ball well. That's Andrew Penn bowling for New Zealand against Pakistan in India in front of tens of thousands of people in 1997. These days, cicadas and quiet chatter act as a backdrop to his cricket, which he returned to at the end of 2020 after nearly 2 decades away. Today he's opening the batting for Whanganui in a Rep 2020 tournament in Palmerston North. He took up the game again after moving back to Whanganui from Wellington with his family. His workmates persuaded him to come to club training, having barely played since his last first-class match in 2003.
I think in my first game, my very first run that I got, I took off and boom, the groin went, and so that was out for 2 or 3 weeks. And the next game was the hamstring, and so that sort of happened for a couple of months before the body started to adjust to playing cricket again.
Last year he made the Whanganui Rep team as an opening batsman, but when he played for New Zealand he was a pace bowler. Andrew Penn played 5 one-day internationals between 1997 and 2001 and was a powerhouse at domestic cricket in New Zealand. This season he's back at the bowling crease, sending down plenty of overs for Whanganui in a 2-day match against Hawke's Bay.
The ball still swung a bit, certainly didn't have the same pace. The old instincts really came back. I guess that competitiveness and that desire to get the batsman out. I think I bowled about 18 overs and I couldn't really walk that well for about a week, so it really took its toll, but look, I loved it. It was great fun.
An injured shoulder means he won't bowl again this summer, but he plans to get back into it over winter. Andrew Penn is one of 2 elder statesmen in the Whanganui team. The rest are in their 20s or teens. The team's coach, Warren Maher, says they can learn a lot from having a former international around.
His work ethic and his enthusiasm, 47 years old, you think, oh my God, he don't want to be playing cricket anymore, but he's just so passionate about the game. And like at every training, first there, last to leave, I'd always pick him on my side, mate. At the moment, if he wants to play, he can play as long as he wants.
Sports psychologist Gary Hermanson says for someone like Andrew Penn, who can still perform at a decent level, returning to their sport can come without the pressures they used to feel.
I think the important thing is that there's an opportunity to enjoy the experience. A lot of the time when you're aspiring and striving for higher honours or for being able to prove that you are capable of what you're doing, there's a layer of anxiety that sits there.
But what do Andrew Penn's opponents think when they see who they're up against?
I think a few people had to have another look because they weren't sure if it was the same guy. It was really great because I was actually playing with quite a few of my old cricket mates' sons. Yeah, it was really nice. I think, people sort of had a double take.
The 47-year-old, who is also an administrator for Cricket Whanganui, says he'll give up his spot in the team if a youngster is ready to step up. He says for many years he felt like he underachieved at the sport, but he's changed his view as he's grown older. As his former teammates sit back and watch from the bar or their couch, Andrew Penn plans to keep playing.
Now to the cross-country capers of a mum and her 6-week-old who've been warming hearts around Dunedin. Hiriwa and her baby have been spotted in various locations around the town. The sea lions have wombled down the fairway in the middle of a golf game and braved the traffic to get to the beach. Dock Ranger Jim Fife has been keeping an eye on the inquisitive pair.
This mother and pup are just quietly learning about each other and the coastline. So the pup has been hidden away for about 6 weeks up at the Chisholm Golf Links, and as of Thursday week was brought down, swum around Lawyer's Head, and ended up on Tomahawk Beach. So they've been hanging out just behind the dunes for about a week now, and the pup has been taken for swims, especially when she starts to wear mum out, and mum thinks, right, I'm going to take you for a big swim so that you sleep more.
And they've been on the golf course too?
Yeah, Hariwa was nicely hidden away up on the golf course. She's a creature of stealth, and she manages to find the most remarkable places to hide her pup away, and pretty much hidden under the taupara bushes for the 6 weeks, with not many people noticing at all. Was only when she started moving her pup and wandered for 800 metres down the fairways before she crossed John Wilson Drive. She did manage to get in the way of a golf game at that point, but one call about getting in the way for 6 weeks of hard work by Hariwa, I think is not too bad.
So she's got a name, right, Hariwa? So do you know her?
Yes, we know all of the descendants of a female we call Mum, who started having pups in Dunedin in about 1994. So this was the first breeding of sea lions back on New Zealand mainland for hundreds of years. They were hunted out, along with the moa, we think. Really only survived down in the subantarctic islands. So endemic to New Zealand, almost became extinct. Really amazing to get them back on the mainland, and we're learning a lot about them.
So what did the golfers reckon when she took a wander by?
They just... because she had been so discreet for so long, I think they were just a little bit surprised to have a sea lion turning up in the middle of the game. But after we talked to them about why she was there, I don't think they minded having to wait for 5 or 10 minutes for them to move through.
So what is your advice to people if they see her and her pup out and about?
Certainly, we've got around 20 pups born between Warrington and St Clair this year. So any of our sandy beaches, any of our coastline, people might be coming across mothers and pups. So just be aware that you might be seeing them. Please keep dogs under control. Don't let them wander off. Be ready to put them on a lead if you need to. They're not particularly scary animals, but they're not afraid of people. You get too close, they might charge at you. Just give them space, and if they look like they're showing an interest in you, back off and enjoy watching them from a distance.
How are you keeping an eye on them, Jim?
This year we've got 3 summer rangers whose job it is to go around our beaches and just educate people about the bylaws. So they're based with DOC and the Dunedin City Council, between the two organisations, and they're out and about on a daily basis from 8 till 7 at night. So it really has given us increased our power to respond to issues, to look at what's happening at particular places, and keep an eye on the sea lions.
So this really is about a mum just introducing her pup to the big wide world, showing it around a bit.
Yeah. Look, it's been fascinating to watch. She's obviously still quite trying to be reasonably discreet. She needs to go off to feed at sea every day, so the pup's hidden away in the bushes, which is a bit of consternation for us sometimes at busy beaches. But she'll come back and she'll meet and greet her pup. Really socialise with it, try and get some sleep, but also be there to run down the beach and call their pup back if it seems like it's wandering off too far. So learning. They're going to be together for a year, and they need to be able to find each other. They recognise each other by smell and by their calls. I'd like to know what they're saying sometimes, but I haven't quite deciphered sea lion language.
Hey, is it a cutie, the little offspring? Is it cute, the pup?
Yeah, absolutely. I might be biased, but I think New Zealand sea lions are probably the best looking of all the sea lions.
And that is Dock Ranger Jim Fife. And what a treat for all those people down there in Dunedin to be able to see that couple, that pair wandering around, even if they are on the golf course. A lot of you getting in touch about the protest in Wellington, as you can imagine. This listener says perhaps Jacinda should announce that mandates will be lifted when 90% of the eligible population has had their booster shot. Kathy from Christchurch says it's an absolute disgrace and I'm struggling to support the police position on this or whoever is telling them what to do. It's just a joke to decent law-abiding citizens. The government needs to get big boy pants on and sort it, or else next thing we know they'll be building a swimming pool beside the veggie garden. Did I hear that right? Veggie garden? Yep, you did. No respect for decent citizens' rights, not to mention who on earth will be paying to clean this awful mess up. And another person says, disgusted and dismayed by the stance New Zealand police have decided to take today. The protest is only going to get bigger and the protesters more emboldened. I want my city back. But on the other hand, this person says the police are correct and the Wellington winter is coming and this will pass.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Police Association President says frontline officers support the Commissioner's decision to rule out any enforcement action to do with the protest at Parliament. Chris Cahill says when the police have acted, such as carrying out arrests and threatening to tow vehicles, the number of protesters increased. He's told Checkpoint that sitting on a lawn is not a major problem compared with rioting in the streets, and the police response is appropriate. He says the proportion of force required to move the protesters would not be proportionate to the risk they pose. Mr Cahill says that some protesters are likely to drop away when they realise there's not going to be a confrontation. He says the protesters are selfish and it's disappointing they're not prepared to look at the impact they're having on other people. Wellington iwi Ngāti Toa says abuse and threats at the protest need to stop. Runanga Chief Executive Helmut Modlik says there's clearly a significant depth of feeling, but the protest needs to be wound up.
Even though they're hurting, even though they're angry and disappointed with things, it's just not okay to threaten people, to abuse people, to hurt people. That's not okay. And Ngāti Toa is keen to see that come to a stop.
Yesterday, Te Atiawa, on whose whenua Parliament sits, also called for a resolution to the protest. It condemned comparisons made by protesters to parihaka as wrong and amounting to cultural misappropriation. Almost 30 community and business leaders have also told protesters at Parliament that the harassment and disruption has to end. A Give a Little page set up to take donations for demonstrators has been closed off by the organisation. The page was set up 10 days ago and up to its closure had received $1,000. Give a Little General Manager Mel Steele says raising funds to participate in a protest isn't a breach of the website's terms, but says since the protest became an illegal occupation, the page was restricted from receiving further donations. Another donations page online has collected more than $5,000. The head of the judiciary is worried that the Parliament protest has forced a High Court case to be adjourned. The Chief Justice, Dame Helen Winkelman, says she's concerned about the disruption to the High Court and Court of Appeal. Kay Albert reports.
Chief Justice Winkelman says the Court of Appeal on Molesworth Street has been closed since Monday because of road closures and noise associated with the protest. She says vehicles are blocking the secure access area to the court and tents have been erected in the court precinct. She says a one-week sexual violation trial that was due to start next Monday has been adjourned, which takes a toll on everyone involved. Judge Winkelman says functioning courts are critical to law and order and safeguarding human rights, and the current situation is extremely difficult.
A key organiser of the truck protests in the Canadian city of Ottawa has reportedly been arrested. The acting police chief, Steve Bell, says officers are working to end the protests as soon as possible.
We've been bolstering our resources, developing clear plans and preparing to take action. The action is imminent. In the past few days, we've been communicating directly with the unlawful protesters. We've told them they must leave, and we have warned them the consequences of disobeying these rules. We want to end this unlawful protest peacefully and safely.
The demonstrators, many of whom have been in downtown Ottawa since last January opposing COVID restrictions, late January opposing COVID restrictions, have been told to leave or risk arrest. Royal New Zealand College of GPs Medical Director Dr Brian Betty says it's time for a change in mindset with Omicron. He's told Checkpoint that isolation restrictions should be cut back because New Zealand needs to start living with COVID. He says we need to de-escalate fear and anxiety because for most people the virus will affect them as a mild to moderate respiratory illness. There are 1,929 new community cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand today, a record high. And Hawke's Bay mayors are demanding a meeting with Transport Minister Michael Wood over the speed limit drop on the Napier-Taupo road. Today, the speed limit on a large stretch of the highway fell from 100 to 80 kilometres an hour, but regional leaders aren't happy. The region's Transport Committee Chair, Martin Williams, says he wrote a letter on behalf of the mayors to the minister.
The principal request is an opportunity to meet with the minister at mayoral level, whose districts absolutely hinge in terms of well-being on the lifeline which that corridor provides.
Regional leaders argue the lower speed will be bad socially and economically for its people. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Argentina-born Aotearoa-based photographer and filmmaker Lula Cacciara selects a mixtape. Country Life checks out a sheep and cattle station in the Reese Valley at the head of Lake Wakatipu, which is about as close as you can get to paradise without actually being there. And because it's the anniversary of the death of Dame Niall Marsh, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to Who Done It. Find out on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint shortly, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, fine spells and the odd shower at times. Waikato to Taumarunui, the central high country, also from Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine with isolated afternoon showers. Taranaki to Wellington, generally fine, the odd shower about Taranaki and Wellington tomorrow. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, but showers developing in Bulla this evening. Rain spreading from the south tomorrow afternoon and evening. Heavy at times with possible thunderstorms about Bulla, Western Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds. For Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud today. Rain tomorrow, clearing during the afternoon or evening. Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with showers. Rain developing in Fiordland tonight and spreading north tomorrow morning. Heavy and possibly thundery at times, then clearing from the south. And for the Chatham Islands, long fine spells. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll be back with news headlines at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Eden Park says its financial viability is at risk as it stares down the barrel of a third straight year of disruptions due to COVID-19 settings. Meanwhile, uncertainty over just how long the country will remain at red is causing major headaches for school and club sport around the country. And as Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe report, it's not just our biggest sports and venues bracing for more COVID chaos.
Out of the Players' Tunnel and onto the Garden of Eden. But there's not a blue in sight, nor an All Black about. But Chief Executive Nick Saunton's here, and instead of a rugby ball, he's got the financials on hand.
We've got $500,000 of fixed costs a month and zero revenue. Our caterer's got $230,000 of fixed costs and zero revenue.
The rugby rubbed out, the cricket cancelled, bars sit abandoned, pie stands packed down, hot dogs on hold. Welcome to Eden Park's new normal. Empty stands and certainly no fans. And if you're wondering just how normal this is now, well, the park, New Zealand's national stadium, has lost 23 events to either postponement or cancellation since the pandemic began. And the financial toll is really starting to bite. And that list is ever growing. Now more than 25 events have been put off or scrapped since February 2020. So for Sortner, a sense of deja vu, staring down the barrel of year 3 of COVID complications.
The real challenge at the moment is the uncertainty with the red traffic light system. Having pods of 100 is not viable for venues. We understand it's important for our hirers to have content played and achieve, whether it be broadcast rights or indeed for the players' welfare. But that doesn't employ the 3,000 people on event days, and it doesn't provide the revenues that are needed to maintain this asset.
The only thing on the horizon is Super Rugby, which could be back in the next month, but with either pods of 100 spectators or no fans at all.
At some stage we'll get to the point where we'll have to really look at our spending, and sadly for us, the majority of our costs are fixed. The only variable cost is our people. And it's very important to note that our people are critical in being able to deliver, whether it be the 3 Women's World Cups over the next 2 years, to Matatini, or our calendar of events, as we work towards rebuilding the confidence in the economy and the country.
And as our neighbours open up, full capacity crowds have just been confirmed for AFL games in Melbourne, our favourite Kiwi pastimes take a hit. But it's not just pro level. The humble club or school netball season could look a little different too.
We have started some small social competitions, and they, at this stage, the numbers are okay. We had to go down the path of vaccination only to be able to operate any competitions. So we have, fortunately, we can operate multiple gatherings within our venues.
Netball North Harbour Chief Executive Lynette Brady says challenges could arise when the main season starts in April.
The schools are putting pressure on us to make decisions about what will and won't happen. My view is at this stage it's too early. We don't know. So we don't want to put something out now and say no spectators, because potentially in the school space, if we're still in the red at 100 per gathering, we may very well have to limit the number of spectators we can have. That then puts further pressure on obviously families, schools. How do they get them here? Because are families going to be happy to drop them at the gate and wait, and how does that work?
You are somewhat at risk here, but don't worry. I'm going to blast in with this attacking.
Okay. But away from the bright lights of Eden Park, far from the crowds of the Barfoot and Thompson Netball Centre, sits another, more modest club that's feeling the COVID crunch. We drop in on Auckland Chess Centre and meet Ewan Green. His tuition's turned digital. Safe to say, he's missing the busy club's buzz.
I'll be happy to see them here, yes, certainly. Over the board play is that's really where it should happen.
The former New Zealand champion speaks as he sits before a board at the club's deserted Mount Eden headquarters. Today on hand to teach me a lesson. Safe to say our game's over quickly, but these physical exchanges are a thing of the past.
6 months ago I did nothing online. It was all face-to-face. Wonderful juniors, of course. But now it's basically 100% online.
And as long as the country remains at red, Mr Green says there'll be no matches face-to-face over the board.
Chess doesn't lend itself. I mean, it's face-to-face, several hours, in pretty close proximity. And the aim is to check them, not to infect them.
From the country's national stadium all the way down to humble chess halls.
Checkmate.
COVID fatigue now appears to be the name of the game.
And if you were listening to that on radio, do check out the video. It'll be on our webpage. That former New Zealand chess champ took our Nick out in 4 moves, just 4 moves. The principal youth court judge says there is a clear lack of targeted support for young female offenders and he wants action. It's a message backed by the Children's Commissioner and a top child and adolescent psychiatrist who says calls for this stretch back years. Katie Doyle reports.
Kōrero, or girls, make up roughly 30% of young offenders who end up in the youth court. As Judge John Walker explains, they often come from a background of long-term exposure to violence and sexual abuse.
Then self-medicating often, and getting into drugs and alcohol in order to cover the pain of all of that.
Despite this, there are few, if any, targeted support services for them. The relatively small number of female young offenders are spread right throughout Aotearoa, which means it's hard to establish female-specific services in any one location.
We know that women's pathways into criminal offending is often very different to that of males, and so the way out has to also be different.
Judge Walker says it would be hard to see how something like mixed gender group therapy would work for girls, especially if they've been abused by men. He says research has shown the answer could lie in individualised, home-based, whānau-focused interventions.
With positive female relationships, and I suppose that gives some hope that you don't need to be setting up intervention programs as such, that might involve a number of people attending a course, but a more individualised approach.
Dr Hinimore Elder is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. She says young female offenders have huge potential, but worries the lack of targeted interventions can be a barrier to reaching it. For Dr Elder, those interventions aren't just about gender, they're cultural too.
We all see these kōrero as the Māori ones in particular. I see the majority of them, and we see them as descendants. They have whakapapa. They're part of those lines that flow through them, but often they have never had an opportunity to really access those cultural resources that we know will help them to feel better about their situation and help them to grow and reach their potential.
It's a no-brainer for Dr Elder, who says calls for this are ongoing. She doesn't understand why nothing's been done.
Their lives, their futures are absolutely essential, and so their opportunities are being marginalised at the moment.
The Children's Commissioner says concerns about the lack of female-specific interventions are long-standing. Judge Frances Evers says there are great programs for young boys in the system, but not for girls. She would like to see more community-based services.
Each community is different. What's wonderful about it being a community-based program is that they know their people and can provide the support, but it has to be very much catered for female offenders because their needs are different from young male offenders.
Judge Evers says kōrero going through the system are hugely intelligent and blossom when the right support is put around them. She says that can include attending confidence-building courses and ensuring they are kept in education.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The laptop's perched on the kitchen table, comfy pants in position if you're lucky, maybe even some funky old socks on too, and the water cooler conversations are no more. The line between home and work has been blurred, with so many forced into their living rooms to work from home during COVID. Kim Moody looks at what impact that's had on traditional office workers.
For thousands of workers across the country, home is now work. AUT Business School Professor Jared Ha believes a shift in office culture is taking off.
We're going to see, I think, a lot more professional workers having that kind of hybrid workplace, working a bit from home, maybe 2 days a week, maybe 3 days, and going into work the other days.
He says a mix of office and home working is more appealing for some, and managers need to be ready to meet in the middle. Head of Wellbeing at Skills Consulting Group, Jane Kennelly, says bosses need to plan for the long haul, instead of having workers in and out of the office after each COVID announcement.
Taking a stronger step around that whole notion that structure creates liberty. And I think we need to make sure that we protect our employers by allowing them and, in fact, requesting a very structured working response from them that isn't going to see them overcommitted.
She says employers need to give staff certainty so people know what's expected of them. Jared Ha says workers need to be trusted, with studies showing productivity levels at home are on par with in-office levels, and some research suggesting people are more creative out of office.
There are some employers who don't like it. They want to keep their eyeballs on their workers. My personal opinion is that if they're worried that, employees are working from home and not really working, I bet you that employee is doing the same thing in the office, right? They're either the social butterfly going around, or they're on the internet all the time and just none of it actually has to do with work.
Office workers we spoke to say people want more flexibility.
Flexible working in general we had before COVID anyway, so people are able to work more because they can stay home with their sick kids or whatever they need to do. So I think on balance it all works out.
So we used to use it as a bit of a carrot in terms of people coming to work for us, but that's no longer an advantage.
Yeah, it's tricky to get people back in if that's what we wanted to do.
So I'll work at home 2 days a week. It's probably a good balance. Yep. So 3 in the office, 2 at home. Even coming into the office, seeing people at work is good, and even just coming into town.
University of Auckland Associate Professor of Psychology Nikki Hare says rock-solid boundaries are key when you're working from home. And she has some tips for people struggling to keep on track.
I use a Pomodoro app that gives you 25 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of a break. And it means that I can actually, in those 5 minutes, I can hang out my washing without feeling guilty because that is my break. It really structures your day in a way that I think is incredibly helpful. And then keeping track of how many hours you've actually done.
Jane Kennelly says bosses need to wake up and smell the home-brewed coffee, or staff will vote with their feet and leave.
If employers don't get this, they will lose their people. And then they have to re-employ. Now, tell me about productivity losses when you lose significant people in your business and you're trying to re-employ in an employment market like this. It is a recipe for absolute further disaster.
As the so-called Great Resignation continues, the pressure's on office bosses to rethink the norm.
Keep it down. Christchurch City Council had recorded a record number of noise complaints lodged at the end of last year. It's thought to be caused by event cancellations, which has left people nowhere to party but home. With the universities canning their O-Week events, Neva Chittick asked Canterbury students if they'll follow the noisy neighbour trend.
February is already one of the loudest months in Christchurch, but the council's head of regulatory compliance, Tracy Weston, says COVID-19 restrictions are turning the volume up more than just a notch.
We have noticed an increase in complaints after the lockdowns. The council's received 645 more complaints between November and December 2021 than it did for the same period in 2020. The cancellation of public events such as the annual university student parties, the summer events, concerts, we believe they may have resulted in more people opting to socialise at home.
Canterbury University's O-Week is normally in full swing by now, with events like Toga Party and Festival Electric Avenue attracting up to 30,000 people. This year's events are more subdued, but Student Association President Piers Crowley expects students will still start the year with a party.
I would say now there's quite a high likelihood we'll see a few private gatherings pop up. A lot of students just generally are moving into their flats, so I think the expectation is they'll be wanting to socialise, and I think from our perspective it's just educating them on how best to socialise with Omicron in the community.
Molly is a first-year student at Canterbury who moved into her hall of residence this week. She says the partying has already started.
I know last night there was an incident with someone drinking off campus, in a flat near the campus, and he had to get carried back to Tupu because he was quite intoxicated. But there's still parties going on around the campus. But I think people are still going to go hard.
In the past 10 years, Canterbury tertiary education providers and police, among others, have set up the Good One initiative to reduce dangerous and disruptive partying. Senior Sergeant Roy Apley says Good One is an online party register which alerts local police so they can monitor the parties and pass on safety information to the hosts.
Often, if we've got the resources available, we'll try and visit the larger parties a day or two beforehand. So really it's about taking away the myth of the police will just turn up when there's the first call of some sort of disorder and bust into the address and drag people out.
And he says the initiative is working.
what we've experienced is that all of this work combined together under the sort of umbrella of prevention, making people feel safer and understanding some of the consequences, has actually curtailed a lot of the overindulgence in alcohol. We haven't seen the disorder and the problems associated with excess drinking that we have in years gone by.
Molly is just grateful some orientation parties can go ahead. She thinks having Hall of Residence advisors and other safety measures help keep things orderly.
We have 100 people on our floor, so they're saying that if we have our parties, as long as people on the floor are allowed to come. The 100 includes RAs, so they're watching us the whole time, obviously. They have quite strict rules around where you can drink, so you can drink in your room and you can also drink in the common room, but not on the hallways and elevators. They keep it quite strict, but I think it's good because otherwise it can get quite out of control.
For those planning a get-together, Tracy Weston says complaints can be avoided if people talk to neighbours beforehand and set a curfew.
A massive rescue operation has been taking place in the Brazilian city of Petrópolis after devastating mudslides and flooding. More than 100 people are now known to have died, and the likelihood of finding survivors is diminishing. CNN's Shasta Darlington has more.
The pulling, the sifting, the digging. The race continues in Brazil to try and find survivors after heavy rainfall caused flooding and landslides in the city of Petrópolis, a mountainous region of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro state. Scores are dead and many are missing as streets were washed away and homes buried. Officials say a month's worth of rain fell across the city in just hours. There are fears the death toll could continue to climb as firefighters and volunteer rescue workers use backhoes and heavy equipment to dig through the rubble. Rio de Janeiro's governor compared the destruction to a war zone, but vowed every effort will be made to find survivors.
The teams work 24 hours a day. They will not stop the search at all. It will continue unless for technical reasons it has to stop for 1 or 2 hours. But if everything goes normal, we won't stop at all.
Drone footage shows the massive scale of the damage as the landslides destroyed everything in their path. 269 landslides were recorded Tuesday, according to Brazil's Civil Defense Secretariat. Many residents pick up what personal belongings they could salvage from what's left of the hillside neighborhood of Alto da Serra, one of the area's hardest hit. Others comfort each other as they take in the magnitude of what was once their livelihood. One man searched all night for members of his family.
Today I'm removing bodies. I removed my mother's body. Yesterday I rescued my son, rescued neighbors, and took him to the emergency room. My son is fine. He's in the hospital, but he's fine. I managed to get him out alive despite the mud.
A local church has opened its doors offering victims shelter, food, and clothing. Small comfort to those who've lost so much.
These days, if you're young, single and looking for love, it can be hard to find the perfect match. Dating apps have become a popular way to meet people, and they've attracted a whole new following during the pandemic when so many face-to-face events have been cancelled. But nothing beats seeing your potential love match in person. In the UK, those looking for love still have the option of speed dating, and there's even a Muslim-specific version called Halal speed dating. The BBC's Shabnam Mahmood has more.
Boy meets girl, they fall in love, get married, easy. But that's Bollywood. In the real world, looking for a potential marriage partner is much harder.
So guys, Assalamu alaikum. I'm really happy to see all the sisters and brothers looking for marriage, inshallah.
Comedian Fathia El Ghori kicks off this halal speed dating event in a London hotel, one of many across the country. She explains how it works.
What makes it halal is that the males and females are not left alone, and they're having 3 minutes each to talk, and then they're moving along and speaking to the next person. And we're going to be doing that for the whole day until everybody speaks to everyone. So you ready? Yalla, bismillah. Time starts now.
The event has been arranged with the sole purpose of introducing single young Muslims looking for a potential husband or wife. Here's some of the participants.
Well, this approach is quite modern. Everyone's super friendly, and it is an opportunity to network and meet other people within the Muslim community.
I penciled in going home at lunchtime if I really wasn't enjoying it, and I'm here, I'm staying.
There's some 3 minutes that fly by because they're so enjoyable, but there's also some 3 minutes that are painstakingly long.
Here you get to meet 50, 100 people at one time, which is a rarity.
For many young Muslims, a traditional introduction by families is not for them, while many say they're disappointed with online matrimonial websites.
You can't really sort of pick up on anyone's energy or anybody's kind of vibe on dating apps.
It's good to meet those people that I would normally go for. And in like 3 minutes you can learn what you can learn in an app in a month.
It's a safe environment, and as a woman I do feel safe.
You have to realise that when you're on an app, you're not the only person talking to that person. They're talking to other people.
Ali, tell me a bit about yourself.
Today's event has been arranged by the Muslim marriage website singlemuslim.com, whose founder is Adeem Yunus.
Post-COVID, there's a huge demand for this kind of thing, and people, they're just really comfortable because they can see the other individual. This is the best way, really, and you can't almost fake it, because if you're 5'5", you're 5'5".
So like the Bollywood blockbuster Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, did Raj find his Simran at this event?
I think it's too early to say, but certainly potentially making good friends, if nothing else.
Yeah, there's 1 or 2 people.
Honest answer? No.
Any rishta potentials?
Possibly yes.
Before we head off, this listener says about the protests and how long can they go on. It's going to be months. They have the resolve and the infrastructure to sustain this illegal occupation. And another interesting question from a listener, why does the Prime Minister never come on this show to explain what government is or isn't doing? It is a question I ponder endlessly myself. I'm sorry I can't provide you with an answer. We will continue to invite her on the program. That's all we've got time for. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. If you've missed anything from the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check out all our stories online. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you for your company.
RNZ News headlines, Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Police Association president has told Checkpoint that frontline officers support the Commissioner's decision to rule out any enforcement action against protesters at Parliament. Wellington iwi Ngāti Toa says abuse and threats at the protest need to stop. A Give a Little page set up to take donations for demonstrators